It's been due to Jodi. So Jodi, if you would come on up. I'm so glad you're here. Yay!
Thank you.
And I'm going to let you take over.
All right. Well, it's so good to hear everybody's story. That's one of the most important things, is to know where you all are. Today, my goal for you is to understand why diet is the foundation. And it doesn't really matter if you have Lyme for, been diagnosed or had it for a few months, or you've had it for many, many years and you have all the co-infections and everything that goes with Lyme. It matters because we have to have a foundation to build on. So I'm going to paint you some word pictures. Some of you that know me have heard these before, because to me they're very important. But we sing a song in Sunday school a lot with the kids that talks about build your house on the rock, because when the storm comes, then it'll stand firm. We all know that being treated for Lyme is a storm. Agreed? Everybody that has ports, everybody that's been through it, even oral treatment, IV treatment, it's going to be a storm. So as we build this foundation, then we can handle much better whatever that storm looks like. If it's a reinfection, if it's a co-infection, if it's a whole other issue. So learning what a foundation looks like is really important. And in the area of Lyme, like many other issues, we know some things. Now, everybody's unique. I am not a believer that everybody is gluten sensitive. I'm not a believer that everybody is dairy sensitive or casein sensitive or anything sensitive. We're all unique. But we know some things that are loads on our body. So today, as I share some of the ways you can take loads off of your body, we're just going to focus on those things that are most agreed on. And the Lyme doctors seem to all agree that gluten can be a load on the body. A lot of people are gluten sensitive to start with, maybe even celiac. That means your body does not produce the enzyme to digest gluten. But because gluten is such a common food in our diet, the protein that is found in many different grains, barley and rye and triticale and kamut and spelt and wheat and farro. Did I get them all? I'm pretty close. If I miss something, we'll probably come back to it. But all of those, I gave you a list in some of your resources. All of those grains have gluten. And it's not that they're bad. Okay, that's the first thing. They're not bad. This is not a bad and good. This is an easier and not as easy kind of idea. So that helps a little bit, especially when you're trying to explain it to your children. Well, Mommy, is wheat bad? No, God made wheat. Wheat is good. It's just right now it's too much of a load. And since a lot of people, what we can explain to our children, and I think helps us a lot too, this is a temporary situation. It may not be forever that you're being this cautious and this careful. But while you are, we might as well learn to make some yummy things that are gluten-free. But that load of gluten is like, if you were to think of your body as a camel, just think camel for just a second. First picture you have is lumbering camel going through the desert with this huge load on their back. You know what you gotta think of when you think of camels? They're a beast of burden. Just like our body is a beast of burden, and it is made to carry a load. But have you ever heard the adage, the straw that broke the camel's back? Okay, so we're looking at our camel and we're saying, what are some of the straws we can take off to give this camel the ability to stand up and walk? And for a lot of people, that is diet. So for you, it may be more than just what we're going to talk about tonight. There are people that are sensitive to many, many things. We're going to talk a little bit about that multiple sensitivity. But the focal points are the big guys first. Gluten is a big guy. That is something that most people have every single solitary day, and because the gut is so often affected by Lyme or co-infections. Remember that when we say Lyme, it's kind of like saying autism. It's this whole big spectrum. It is not just the Lyme infection, because I don't think anybody in here can say, I have Lyme and nothing else. It's always I have Lyme and, these other issues. So it's a spectrum of issues, and digestion happens to be a really key factor. Then we're going to add treatment on top of that, and treatment causes all kinds of problems with our intestinal system, which is where the Lyme affects. You have to have treatment if you're going to get better. So at that same time, we're going to try to say, okay, now we're going to treat, so let's work on the gut. Let's work on the intestinal system. Let's try to give it enough that you can get through treatment without being hugely compromised. And there's still going to be compromised, but not hugely to the point where you can still remain mobile and doing as much as possible. The largest, most common, most frequent allergy in America is dairy, as much as 1 out of 2. Dairy also is a big issue because it's in our diet every day, but it's a bigger issue for more reasons than that. 2 things in dairy, lactose and casein. A lot of people say, I'm not lactose intolerant, I don't have diarrhea, I don't have to bother with dairy. That is one issue, okay? The second issue is casein. Casein is milk protein. And milk protein is a whole separate issue than lactose. So that can be a sensitivity as well. Remember, 1 out of 2 is what a lot of the statistics show are sensitive to dairy, either lactose or casein. And then there's this whole other big issue, and that is the fact that cattle are given, and milk cows are given antibiotics twice a day, every day of their life. Now, I think most all of you in the room that are being treated with some kind of antibiotic. And we know the good thing about an antibiotic is it kills the bad guys. The bad thing about an antibiotic is it kills the good guys. We are going to be desperately working, any of the docs you're working with, whether it's doctors here in Indiana or it's Washington, D.C. or Ohio or wherever you're working with the doc. I've never heard a Lyme doctor that has not stressed probiotics and fixing the gut and the fact that we're now calling our gut, our intestinal system, our second brain. Because about 60% of our immune system is right here. So anything we can do to take the load off, to get the antibiotics that would be present in our environment, in our food, out, is going to allow us to be able to handle our treatment better. So the reason I want to just make that so clear is laying that groundwork is different than, I can't have dairy, and I can't have gluten, and we'll talk a little bit about sugar. Those kinds of things. It's really hard to explain that to people, but if you can have a little bit more you can give them, then they can understand a little bit better why your diet is so restrictive. The last area is sugar. And there's a great sheet. I don't think I gave you this one today. We'll probably do this one another time. But 59 Reasons Sugar Ruins Your Health is a book, actually, that a gal named Nancy Applegate wrote years ago. I feel like an antique when I talk about it. But she just put 59 reasons, and later she expanded it to 145. So 59 reasons aren't enough. We can always add someone 145 reasons. But the deal is, sugar compromises your immune system. What is already compromised with Lyme? Immune system. We won't even get into neurological, GI, just your immune system. Just that alone is so compromised by sugar. There is nothing natural about sugar. We can live the rest of our lives without 1 grain of white sugar. It literally pulls nutrients, blocks minerals, messes with the acid content of our stomach. It does just a million things that are not profitable for our body. But again, in the American diet, about 134 pounds per person, up to 150. That equals out to 33 teaspoons for the average person. At 21 teaspoons are phagocytes, our frontline white cells that are there to protect us against things like Lyme. Lay down and take a nap. So it's highly possible that when you were out camping and you were eating s'mores, that was part of the reason that your immune system could not attack Lyme. And why one person can be bitten by a tick and not get Lyme, and another person can be bitten by the same tick and get Lyme, right? So we want our immune system to be as strong as possible. Now there's huge other issues like genetics and all that. We're not going to get into as much today as we will maybe in a future class or future opportunity. But to look at those 3 things, when people are getting started, it's all overwhelming. Treatment's overwhelming. Information is overwhelming. Good grief. What can I do? I mean, it's just terrible to start this when you don't have any understanding and information because it's so complex. So these are some things, whether you're starting in treatment or you're coming up behind, that you can do. And the deal is, so many people say to me, it's impossible. It's too hard. I can't do that. I hear this from the doctors all the time. In fact, a couple of Lyme doctors have just told me, well, Jodi, we'd love to use your services, but it's just too hard. My patients won't do it. And yet, if you can't lay a foundation, how do you build on it? So that's why it's so important and why I'm so grateful that Leanne let me start first. Because there's lots for you to learn. There's lots more to add to it. I've been a nutritionist for about 38 years. And I remember going to conferences back in the 70s and 80s. We didn't know about Lyme then. You know that? I mean, Lyme isn't brand new. It just wasn't in the Midwest, so therefore I could skip all those, right? You know, I didn't have to deal with all those seminars on Lyme. We don't have it in Indiana. And I could support people when they were getting treatment in other states, but I didn't have to know about it. And we're just talking with a couple of you all that the CDC has finally updated the website and does mention that we do have Lyme in Indiana. Amazing that they figured that out after this amount of time, but we're grateful that they did. So now it's just becoming, you know, more and more important. Who would ever think that in Indiana, before we ever had Lyme here, by the way, that we would have a doctor that treats only Lyme patients that you can't get into because she's so full? You know, that's just an amazing thing. So we know this disease takes a toll on many different areas of the body, and the practical application is one of the most important things. So I talked to you about some of the things you can't eat. I want to talk to you about some of the things you can eat, because I am a person that believes we focus on the positive and not on the negative. So now that, you know, we just threw out 3/4 of everybody's diet, what do we eat? What will make a difference that's positive? And I want to just, I tell everybody that my second name is the Veggie Queen. When I die, I want a crown on my little, you know, on my head when I'm laying there. Also, I'll close casket, but I wanted to say the Veggie Queen, because vegetables are your friend. They are your friend. They provide antioxidants. They provide anti-inflammatories. Today I'm going to focus more on making some goodies and some treats, but you're always going to hear me talk about vegetables. If you could do one thing to help yourselves with Lyme, eat 7 servings a day of vegetables and 2 servings of fruit. 7 servings, okay, every day. It's critical. It'll lessen your risk of all kinds of diseases, and it will help you with inflammation. It will help you with oxidative stress, which is huge with Lyme. That's what causes so much of Herxheimer's and die-off and reactions. If we have enough antioxidants, we can prevent that oxidative damage, which results in so many of the side effects. So a serving size is a 1/2 cup if it is chunky, and it's a cup if it's leafy. If it's a child and they're young, then we reduce that, you know, down depending on how old they are. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. 7 servings. I want you to put it on the front of your refrigerator. I bought these little veggie magnets, and every time we had a serving, we moved a little veggie magnet over, because the positive is more important than the negative. The other thing that I want to really encourage you to do is drink water, and it needs to be pure water. You know, one of the things we're finding out so much about is our water. And pure water is reverse osmosis or distilled. You need pure H2O, and it's almost impossible to find. We've polluted the ground, we've polluted the atmosphere, so therefore it's probably not going to come out of your tap. And if you're not drinking good water, you will not detoxify properly. Okay? So 2 things that you could do that are extremely positive and really easy. You can drink water. Anybody know, Robin, you shouldn't answer because you'll probably know in a second. But anybody know the formula for how much water you need every day? Half your body weight in ounces. She's been a good student. Half your body weight in ounces. Just jot it down. This is how many ounces I need every day. I need it every day, not 3 days out of 7 or 4 days out of 7. Every day, because the way you detox, the way you process chemicals, you're going to need more depending on certain types of treatment. But every person needs half their body weight every day. Now I haven't. Go ahead.
I realized we need in Marion County water. We had a filter, it still tasted terrible. But we got Culligan. We through Culligan you can rent for $24 a month. It's a pretty economical fee, and it's reverse osmosis. It's like Starbucks filter.
Exactly, it is. It's like it's amazing. And a lot of times, even when you're renting them, they'll apply it towards purchase.
Yeah.
We rented ours for a while, and all of a sudden they said, "Oh, it's paid for. It's yours." It's like, Wow! You didn't even tell us we were paying for it, so that can happen too. And if you go into Kroger or you go into Meijer, whenever you go into one of those fill stations, you can put the water into your own containers. It's about 39 cents a gallon, 35 cents a gallon. It's pretty cheap. Also, be certain that you're using, I don't see any bad water bottles, so it's really exciting not to have to call somebody out on plastic water bottles, but be really careful about what you put your water into because of the problems with the estrogenicity and so on in plastic water bottles. Try really hard to use your blue plastic, your hard plastics that are BPH free. Because everything we're talking about today is taking the load off of our body. So I made you some things to try today, and we're going to do a little recipe because I want you to see how simple this is. Anybody can make this. Robin's probably youngest could make this. Most of these recipes. My recipes are very simple. They're really more food combining than they actually are recipes. And I tried to challenge you with a few things and do some things that are a little bit farther outside of the box, okay, than traditional foods, because a lot of people don't know anything about using quinoa flour or some of the more unusual flours. So today, I gave you a recipe, but I always change things up based on what I have, and I made you some blueberry beet muffins. And you say, what? Blueberry beet muffins? Why in the world are you going to use some gross, disgusting beet in a muffin? Well, let me tell you, beets are the best liver detoxifier known to man. The best liver detoxifier. So if we are taking harsh chemicals to try to improve this outcome of Lyme, to kill this Lyme, that has to go through our liver, correct? So detoxifying our liver is huge with Herx reactions, die-off, whatever we want to call it. People call it different names. Now on our little muffins, by the way, these muffins are your recipe, except for the fact that instead of using, I never know what I'm going to have on hand. I do a lot of cooking classes. I have a big container where I keep all of my different things that I use. And I was out of oat flour, and I said, oh, well, we'll just use quinoa instead. So I want you to know that when you're doing a recipe like my types of recipes, you can be really creative. You don't have to do everything the same. If you are allergic to one kind of flour, there's always an option. So quinoa flour is a weird flour. It has a little bit of an interesting taste. I always tell people don't use this 100% because you probably won't be happy. It's got a stronger flavor. But how many of you know quinoa is the only grain? Well, actually they're saying maybe teff is another grain. I won't get into teff today. That's one a lot of people have never heard of. But quinoa is the only grain that's a complete protein. So isn't that cool? That you can use quinoa and you don't have to complete the protein. So we're always looking at balancing carbs and protein with any kind of issue where you have to take antibiotics. Because yeast, or the byproduct, the bad guys of taking an antibiotic, feed on carbohydrates, not just sugar, but any kind of carbohydrate. So, it gets a little more complicated. Not only do we want to be sure we don't get any sugar to feed that yeast, we want to be really careful about carbohydrates and get the right kind. So quinoa is a complex carbohydrate, and it's a complete protein, so it's really awesome when you put it in something because then you're going to have a protein content that's complete without having to add anything to it. So in your muffins, you have quinoa flour, and then I also, one of the flours that I always try to introduce people to, because when you're getting started making all your own flour blends and grinding all your own flour, it gets really complicated, and you're like, what really works, what tastes good? So I try to come up with some different basics. And I always tell people, this is about as clean as they come, this namaste. How many of you use this already? A couple. This is available, in Costco now in great big containers. Costco has really been very sensitive to the gluten-free community. But the reason that I say clean is it doesn't have white flour in it. And white rice flour is no different than white flour. I want you to remember that one kernel of rice, one kernel, itsy-bitsy kernel, has 40 vitamins and minerals. When you strip it down to white, guess what's left? A big, fat zero. Nothing. Zero. So we enrich it with synthetic vitamins and minerals, and we add back in between 4 and 6. And so what we have is this food that really started out pretty decent, fiber, nutrients, minerals, vitamins, and then we get this simple carbohydrate that does everything to feed all the guys we don't want to feed and doesn't feed the most important one we do want to feed, which is us. So we want to be certain that when you're making switches, you're making right switches. I always tell the story of being up at the Gluten-Free Expo and getting ready to do all these seminars, and the line for the donuts was out the door and around the corner. And I started looking at gluten-free products going, holy moly, these are worse than their white flour counterparts. At least in the health food store, we try to disguise sugar in regular stuff. This way, they just put sugar. They don't even try to disguise it. It's just sugar. So it's not necessarily good that you buy gluten-free. You must read labels. You must know what's in product. You must be aware of what you're consuming. Okay, so whole grain when you're making gluten-free is critical. That's why this quinoa flour says very clearly on it, whole grain. Trust me, if it doesn't, it isn't. If it says rice, what's that tell you? White. Guaranteed. Don't try to pretend. Well, maybe it's brown. It's not. Okay? It's white. If it's brown, they're going to tell you. And so if you look at this, and you're certainly welcome to come up and see everything here. Now, on my muffin, I'm a huge realist. I have 5 children. I have 5 grandchildren. I really have to feed these kids and their friends. I feed half of Purdue sometimes, I think, when my boys go up to school because they just invite everybody over for meals and what I meant for a month last week. So when I try recipes out on kids and all that, I'm serious about things tasting good or that they will eat them, that they are edible. And one of the things that I found in trying to do some spreads for muffins and things that weren't sweet is years and years ago, Dr. Crook, a mentor of mine, someone I served on the board with for many, many years, started talking about making something called better butter. And actually, Land O'Lakes has stolen it, and they probably, Dr. Crook is dead, but he really gets the most credit. But they could pay me for all the millions of pounds of better butter that they've sold in the stores. But what I do is I take an antibiotic-free butter. Do you hear that again? Anything from an animal. Anything from an animal, antibiotic-free. Organic is always guarantees antibiotic-free, but sometimes things aren't certified organic, but they are antibiotic-free. You hear the difference with that? So make certain, again, if it doesn't say antibiotic-free and it doesn't say organic, it isn't. Don't pretend it's not. They're using it. They would be very happy to tell you if they weren't. So what I do is I take equal proportions of the antibiotic-free butter and a good quality oil. Now again, people are different. Some people can use different kinds of oils. Depending on what you tolerate, some oils that I would use in making better butter are light olive, or olive as long as you're not going to spread it on a blueberry beet muffin because we don't want all of the blueberry beet muffins. You can use grapeseed oil as an omega-3 fat. Olive oil is an omega-3 fat. Good quality canola. There's a lot of misinformation on the web about canola, and if you use a low uric acid canola like Spectrum, S-P-E-C-T-R-U-M, Spectrum, I have documentation. When I make a recommendation, I have gone to the source. I don't recommend things unless I know that they really do what they say they do. And Spectrum is a low uric canola oil that is totally cold pressed. And that doesn't really mean anything cold pressed if you see it on the label, but to them, they really do press it without heat, so it's not changed. Omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory. Omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory. In fact, they actually use them to promote breast tumors in women. So safflower, sunflower, corn oil, those are pro-inflammatory oils. So the anti-inflammatories in the omega-3s are the ones that we want to focus on. Avocado oil, kind of pricey. Walnut oil, again, kind of pricey. But the oils that are the least expensive would be grapeseed, olive, or light olive, and the good quality canola. So I mix one of those oils. This happens to be grapeseed. It's not too green. Grapeseed is green, like Lyme, like your shirt there, son. And it is a little weird if you're, somebody's seeing that for the first time and you don't disguise the color a bit. This better butter has cinnamon in it and a couple drops of stevia. So I'm going to put these muffins. I know she gave you plates and all. You want to pass them around? Okay, I'll just put this in here. And you can try them while I'm talking. I will tell you one thing, that a lot of gluten-free is best right out of the oven. So when you find a gluten-free muffin, and I think you'll find these are edible, even with the quinoa flour, which again is stretching you just a bit, they're always the yummiest when they're right out of the oven. If you find one you can freeze, you found a really awesome recipe, because gluten-free doesn't handle cooling and freezing as well as some of the other kinds. Some other flours that I want you to be aware of, and some ones that, again, you can use in any of the recipes that I use. Coconut flour is really popular. It's really heavy. So you have to know that if you're going to use coconut flour, you may need to use a little extra starch. I'm still a believer in using some starch. I have all these in bags because I seem to manage to poke holes in everything. This is arrowroot or tapioca starch. And all that starch does is really non-nutritive, but it's not negative. If you just use a small amount, the starch is going to give texture. I am not a huge believer. You can see I've given you tips and hints about how much to use, kind of basing it on the recipe. I have some guar gum here. I am not a believer really in using gums and dough conditioners. I've tried them. I would rather use chia. I call it chia glop, where you just soak chia seeds in water, or flax glop, rather than using the gums, because I think that we can come up with texture without having to use something that can be negative for some people. Okay? So another flour that is really popular but is a little pricier is almond flour. And if you don't like these muffins with quinoa, I think you would love them with almond. Some people can't use oat. Now, oat is gluten-free. It is guaranteed to be gluten-free now, but it can be cross-contaminated if you have celiac. Cross-contamination is a very minor issue unless you are celiac. What do you think? Are they edible?
Very.
Can you taste the beet?
A little bit. It's not that. I was thinking it would be more earthy. I drink beet juice almost every day.
Yeah.
So but
You
really
should.
good.
Most of the time, kids can't tell there's beet in there.
Yeah.
They're pink. We call them pink muffins because beets are such a gorgeous color. One thing I was going to just tell you as far as almond flour that I just found out, a lot of people have been ordering almond flour from Amazon because it's the cheapest price. And I did find out from someone who actually works in the Amazon warehouse that it's never refrigerated, and that the warehouse gets as high as 85 degrees, sometimes 90 if it's hot outside. So my suggestion to you would be do not order almond flour from Amazon, because anything with a fat content goes rancid very easily. And I have seen almond flour that I haven't been comfortable with. I can smell it even when somebody makes a muffin out of almond flour. A good little tip for any of the nut flours is if you feel a coating on the back of your tongue when you eat it, this is a nut or a flour or a nut butter, or you've noticed that it sort of burns the back of your throat, is probably rancid fat. Now, rancid fat is the most carcinogenic thing you can put in your mouth. So, needless to say, when your immune system is already compromised, you don't want to be taking in rancid fat. So be cautious and be careful. Some people make their own almond flour. You can buy it from a lot of the health food stores. I know Georgetown Market is very generous and helps me to, when Rick found out I was doing, he's the owner of Georgetown Market, Rick Monteith, doing the seminar today, he said, do you need anything? Do you want to take some stuff to use? And they're very generous, but I know that theirs comes refrigerated. So you can ask, does your almond flour come refrigerated? You can smell it. A lot of when your nose gets more and more sensitive. How many of you have noticed that? When you're sick, and especially when you're going through treatment, you smell everything, right? Rancidity starts getting to be more obvious as well. Because we don't want to increase sugar, I'm going to be making a recipe today. In your muffins, I used a little bit of coconut syrup because it's very low glycemic. How many of you use stevia? You know stevia? Stevia is bitter. It has a yucky, bad flavor. 99% of people say, ugh, to stevia. If they've ever done the powdered, they really say, oh, to stevia. I said, I'll not use it. Thank you very much. And then it was like more and more research, and it's the only sweetener that doesn't raise your blood sugar. It's the only sweetener that's safe for diabetics, on and on and on. Like, oh my gosh, I got to learn how to use stevia. So my personal favorite is Sweet Leaf. That's the only brand I use. It's the only one I use. I have 30 boxes in my cupboard, which all are, I won't even give them away because they're that bad unless somebody just says, oh, I happen to like that brand. I mean, they just don't work. It's very difficult to find them out. They add dextrose to them. Some of them have milk in them. They have all kinds of extra added ingredients. But Sweet Leaf is really clean. It's just stevia. And I personally use the vanilla or the English toffee because it covers that bitter flavor. And it's been my trick. It's the only way I have learned to like stevia and use stevia. It's even the best of the best using this Sweet Leaf. It still can taste funky, and it's really hard to get recipes to turn out right. How many of you figured that? I mean, if you're going to use 10 drops of stevia, what do you do for those, make the texture right? So a lot of times I use carriers. And when I say a carrier, something to carry that flavor, something to sort of mask it, to broaden it. Coconut syrup is great, because if you taste coconut syrup, you kind of say, well, it's okay, but it's not that sweet. If you put it in something, it barely sweetens it. But if you boost it with stevia, then it becomes very sweet. And the same is true with rice syrup, brown rice syrup. And brown rice syrup is not very sweet. Both of these would remind you a bit of sorghum. Not as strong as molasses, but kind of sorghum-ish. So it becomes a good carrier. Some people can't even tolerate a little bit of rice syrup or a little bit of coconut syrup, and then I tell them, try, what about applesauce as a carrier, or pear sauce, or a smashed banana, or a smashed peach? That works very well too. Okay, and again, there's levels. You get to the point where less and less is, you're fine with that, and you can do with less. When you're starting out with kids, I have watched some things that moms have served their families and gone, well, they're going to drop a few pounds because, and we've all had, I'll tell you what, I've had so many failures in especially gluten-free cooking when it became very popular. I had hockey pucks, I had, bookends, I had totally inedible, not even the dog would sniff it, and we live on a farm, and our farm dogs like anything that's extra. But no, I totally understand when you're getting started that things are different. But anyway, that's something about stevia, is how to use it as a carrier. One of the things that so many kids really like, I'm using a skillet because I don't have a saucepan that will heat up on a table like this. And since we don't have a kitchen, we're going to use a little skillet because I'm going to make a recipe for you that's brown rice krispies and brown rice krispie treats. And a lot of people get a little frustrated with me when I make recipes because they say, Jodi, you give us a recipe and then you don't even look at it, or you don't even follow it. Or do you ever look at recipes and follow them? I really do plan the recipes for you and try to make sure that my ingredients are correct. And if you ever come up with something that isn't correct, I'm more than happy to be corrected because everybody makes mistakes. But when I'm at home, I sort of look at the kitchen as my artistic palette. It's just an art fun thing to do. So what I want you to do is to be creative when you cook and learn how to save things, because not everything turns out the same way. A lot of times what I do is give you skeletons of recipes. For example, I may say nut butter. Well, what does that look like? Does that look like almond butter, sun butter, walnut butter, macadamia nut butter, cashew butter? It looks like any of those. Now, each one of those are a little different texture. So you might have to wiggle things a bit because the texture is different, okay? There's probably somebody in here that can't use almond butter, and I'm going to use almond butter today because it's what I had access to. If you can't use tree nuts, you can always use seeds, or most of the time you can use seeds. If you can't use seeds or tree nuts, then you could use, I have sort of a version just using the rice syrup and a little stevia and the brown rice krispies, but the nut butter makes it a lot more nutritious. So anybody in here can't use almonds? Boy, that's nice. Nice to see that. I'm just going to heat up, and the reason that we heat it up is just to make it a little bit easier to stir up. So actually, It is on. I'm just going to put some together. I'm going to not measure it out. You can measure it out or not measure it out. It just depends on you. I've made these enough times that I just kind of know what I want it to look like. I'm going to use a little bit, because I use coconut syrup in the muffins, I'm going to use a little bit of rice syrup in here. And it doesn't take much. The other thing, the rice syrup, that's probably about a quarter of a cup. Not drizzle it everywhere. And then we're going to boost that. Some stevia that has some in there. I think I'm going to use, let's see, did I bring just vanilla? Empty the English. Well, we're going to use vanilla because I didn't bring the English toffee. Well, English toffee is really good in this too. Again, they're both very smooth and easy to use in anything. But I'm just going to add a couple of droppers. And when I say droppers full, if you measure that out, that's about 10 drops if you do it drop by drop. Again, normally I would have this in a little saucepan just to kind of mix it all together and get it a little bit heated up so we can add our brown Rice Krispies and it all sticks together. But I'm a firm believer in use what you have. I've taught many a cooking class with absolutely no facilities, not even a sink, so having a sink is utterly phenomenal. We can wash dishes. Okay, we're just going to stir this up and stir it around. I'm also going to add, just for a little extra flavor, how many of you know that both cinnamon and vanilla are hugely flavorful? You know, they add a ton of flavor. This actually looks like it's the Kirkland vanilla. It's not. This is pure vanilla from Haiti. My son just got back from a mission trip, and he brought me some pure vanilla from Haiti, so I put it in this bottle, and thought I'd share a little bit with you, because if you've never had pure vanilla from Haiti, it's heavenly. So if you have regular vanilla, it'll still taste fine. We're using pure vanilla. You can use a lot of the different organic brands. This is obviously organic. The Haitians don't have access to chemicals. That's kind of nice, because one of the few things that they still can utilize is their vanilla. They still grow. And these are brown Rice Krispies. Okay, brown Rice Krispies. You heard that right. Brown Rice Krispies. They still snap, crackle, and pop, but they actually have some nutritive value. The ingredients are, if I can read them without my glasses, organic brown rice syrup, and sea salt. The sugars are less than 1 gram. Always look. There are so many crummy gluten-free cereals that have 13, 14, 18, 20, you name it, grams of sugar. So what we want is we don't need to be adding any extra sugars than we have to. I mentioned cinnamon and didn't put it in. I've got some Frontier spices, are the bulk spices. Do y'all buy those? Y'all know them? You can find them in bulk at any of the health food stores. They make or break your cooking. They really, literally do. If I open this, you probably can smell it in the back room. And a lot of us, maybe you don't, but I have spices that I got for a wedding present a lot of years ago. Then I'm not sure what they are, because they have no smell. So if you have those spices, pitch them or stick them, because they're pretty, on some spice rack, and buy real stuff. But I buy small quantities of spices out of the bulk. And it's funny, because years ago when I used to work in a health food store, my job was to fill the spice containers, and by the end I felt like I was drunk or something by smelling all those flavors, you know, so many different spices. But it makes all the difference from night and day. Do you know that cinnamon helps to decrease your desire and craving for sugar? So if you can put cinnamon in things, not only does it make it taste sweeter, but it decreases your desire for sugar. And a lot of that is really important when you're, especially when you're first getting started. So you put about a teaspoon of sugar in here. Again, just stir it around. We're kind of making this almost like this batter by the time we add all of this. I'm just going to get real and use my fingers here too in a minute. But now we're going to add our brown Rice Krispies. And you can just, again, I just know how many I need. Follow the recipe, and it will always work. And if it doesn't work, you can add it, you know, if you've changed nut butters and your nut butter's a little thinner or a little thicker. But what I normally do at this point is put it in a mold, but my pan's not too hot, so we're just going to do the one pan. And I just kind of work these brown Rice Krispies into my batter. And you can do this in a pan and flatten it. You can make it into balls. You can, you know, cut it. You kind of are just working your brown Rice Krispies into being whatever way you want to do them, and you want to flatten them. I like to make them into balls. A lot of times when I'm making them into balls, let's make that smaller. And do we have one extra little plate? I'll put, I think I left the plate back in the back of my car. I realized I'd forgotten one little bag. But see, they just make into these really nice balls. They freeze. Again, if you want to put them in a 9x13, if you want to put them in any kind of container that you want to put in the freezer and cut them into squares, you can do that. I'll just make a whole bunch of them. But while I'm finishing making these into balls, you can add, I'm going to make some plain, and then I've also brought some add-ons. Again, I am a realist. I am somebody who believes we should be real in what we have expectations of. Are there dairy-free, decent chocolate chips? Yeah. Do they have sugar? Yeah. They still have sugar content. Would I use these really frequently? Not so much, because they're high sugar. But if you have a transitional kid who's saying, I hate you because all you do is feed me bad food and I can't take this, then you make concessions. And you add a few dairy-free chocolate chips because it tastes normal and it tastes like something they really like. I'm not going to add them today because I think that everybody here is probably good with more of the basics. You are welcome to try them if you want to. I still want to alienate somebody that can't have them. I brought some slivered almonds, and one of the things that I really like to do is get that extra crunch in my brown rice Krispie treats. So I'm just going to add a few. Is that okay? Since everybody said they weren't allergic to almond butter, I think we've got everybody. I like adding that extra crunch. So we're going to just do some plain, and then we'll add some with this extra crunch. And a lot of times when I'm making this, I turn my skillet on just a little bit too soon. Can you see that okay? Get pictures. I get my hands a little bit damp in between the balls. So we're going to see if we can keep these together without, again, if you put them in a pan and we're getting this a little bit stiffer than what I want, so we're going to add just a tiny bit more nut butter. I added those extra almonds. We're going to add a tiny bit more rice syrup. This is just an example to you so that you can turn around and make whatever. If it gets too dry, just add a little bit more stevia. I think I really have enough cinnamon and vanilla, so we're just going to knead this into the rest of our Rice Krispies and the rest of our ingredients. Now, while I'm finishing this, because I can multitask because I'm a woman, right? I'm going to tell you some other things that I want you to be really conscientious about. One of the things that we found with Lyme disease and so many of the chronic issues that go with Lyme is that we have a problem with something called leaky gut. Have any of you ever heard that? Leaky gut. And antibiotics cause us to have leaky gut. And when you're taking multiple antibiotics because of this disease, leaky gut becomes a huge issue. So the problem is, whatever the body, what leaky gut is, let me back up just a minute, is your intestinal system, if you were to spread it out, is the size of a football field. Do you know that? It's one cell layer thick, bigger than this room, every one of you. I think that's just utterly amazing. So what happens when you take the antibiotics is like if you were to look outside today and you saw beautiful green grass growing, but there were some dandelions, and you called Chemlon and you said, will you come and take care of my dandelions? And they say, yes, ma'am, we'd be happy to do that. And they come out and they spray your yard. And the next morning you look out and sure enough, you'd have no dandelions, but guess what? No grass. No grass left at all. What grows back if you have no grass? Weeds, right? Any kind, anywhere, any kind of weeds. So with leaky gut, when we don't have any grass and we have a lot of weeds, there's area that is not 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14. Have you got how many actual people we have? I'm going to stop messing with this if we have enough of it to take 20. Well, we better get let's just put a little more in here. I'm still getting a little, my eye is off because I'm doing two things at once. We're just going to add a little bit more here. If I do it in the saucepan, I get a much better idea of how the texture I need to start passing those on and get one more. Okay, but anyway, what I was saying about leaky gut. What happens with leaky gut is because there's nothing there to protect the gut lining. There's holes in the gut lining, and things slip through that aren't broken down properly. So large molecules of protein slip into our intestinal system. And when that happens, the body sees this and says, attack and destroy. There's something wrong here. Attack this, attack and destroy. So we have autoimmune problems. So my point in all of this is we have got to keep the body guessing about what it's going to see. It only attacks and destroys what it sees most frequently. So variety is paramount. It's absolutely positively critical. If you eat brown rice every day, guess what you're going to be intolerant to? Brown rice. If you eat quinoa every day, what are you going to be intolerant to? Quinoa. And when I say intolerant, it's different than an IgE allergy or a hive or the type of allergy that most of the people think about. How many of you have been tested for IgG-mediated allergies? Genova testing, ALCAT, all of those. Anybody know their sensitivities? I'm not saying too many. Especially if you've had the disease for a really long time, your body is trying to help you. It's working for you. It just doesn't know what to do. And so what it tries to do is it attacks whatever it thinks might hurt you. We've got about 6 more here. Is that enough? Did you guys get one of that in? I don't think you guys got. Here. We'll hand this. So anyway, what ends up happening is the body ends up attacking itself, and we start seeing all kinds of autoimmune problems. So not only do you have to be gluten-free, dairy-free, and sugar-free, you have to eat a whole large variety of foods. Oh, and eat your 7 vegetables a day, don't forget there's one. But a variety of food is really, really paramount to you getting well. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. I made one other thing for you. I don't want to say too much because I want to save a little bit of time for questions and maybe explain a little bit of what's on my table. But I made you a pie. Now, you only got the pie. Nobody knew the pie was coming. I thought about just giving it to Leanne for her kids, but I decided maybe we can come up with enough pieces because she told me there were only going to be 7, and I thought, well, this would be really nice if we just have a few people. We can share this pie, but I still think maybe we can come up with enough little chunks you can at least all get a bite. In fact, maybe what we'll do, I might just put a spoon in and. Do you want me to wash that one for you? No, I have 2, but I don't have a knife, so we'll improvise. I'm just going to see if I can, maybe we can just pass it, and people can just take like a little chunk. But you can this is a pretty pie, don't you think? Yeah. It's organic strawberries, organic blueberries, and organic raspberries. The only thing I have done is added a little bit of stevia, just a few droppers. It's not going to be super duper sweet. I mean, it's going to be sweet because the fruit's sweet. It's going to be sweet because there's a little stevia, and I thickened it with a little bit of arrowroot. Biscuits, pie crust, and more is a very simple. This is Bisquick. Bisquick done healthy / gluten-free. Okay, so you can make almost anything out of this. And if you go away and you're like, oh man, I looked at her tips and hints and they look too complicated, you can do anything with this. We're going to a family's home tomorrow. I know I wasn't sure that one would work better than my end of the spoon. And I was making a gluten-free pie last night to take with us tomorrow. And, I keep thinking that so many people think, well, there's nothing that I can have that's normal, that looks normal, that looks like everybody else. And I mean, honestly, truly, I promise you, I don't think that anybody would think that this is any different than any other pie, even the crust. So I want you to taste it and see. When I make gluten-free pasta, I don't advertise it's gluten-free, I just serve it. And rarely ever do I have people say, that's really weird. What's that weird pasta? They just eat it. So I don't know how close to 20 little pieces we have here, but I think if you take a knife and or a fork and we pass it along, everybody can at least get a spoonful. How about that? Put it over here, guys, and I'll put a couple of, let's put a couple of spoons in there. Then if we, and I've got some spoons. You better hand these forks out. Pass it along and grab a spork. A spork is a fork and a spoon. So I'm going to be quiet at this point, let you taste that last little goodie, and then take some questions, because I know that some of what I said is very basic for some of you. Some of you have complicated questions, and some of you have simple questions. Yes.
We have a question from the viewers.
Yes.
In your opinion, is it possible to heal from Lyme without addressing diet?
No. I mean, I'm just going to be really simple, because I just don't think that your immune system can possibly recover from the treatment of Lyme if you do not address the diet function.
And there was an interview with the ILADS. ILADS is the
International.
Sorry. ILADS, is everybody familiar with the ILADS, the International Lyme Association? Okay. ILADS is where all the research and all the physicians are going that are trying to help everybody with Lyme disease. And they have put it definitively that diet matters, especially gluten-free. And I have interviewed 7 Lyme doctors, and not one of them said it was not important. It's foundation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Robin, you had a question, I'm sorry. It's exactly the recipe on here. Exactly the recipe on here. I did it as simplest recipe. They used an egg. I used egg replacer so that people would not have egg in case they were sensitive. That's another top 5 sensitivities: milk, wheat, eggs, corn, soy. So most of the time I avoid at least those big 5. Peanuts, that's a huge issue for yeast, so we avoid that. You know, I try to be, again, very simple. I forgot to explain, too, when I make millet flour, you can buy millet flour already ground, but some grains are really, really, really simple, and millet is really simple to put in a blender because it's not so hard. By the way, millet, you don't use it. This is bird seed. I guarantee you put it in your bird feeder because it's in all bird seed, and it's actually really good. It tastes like a cross, I think, between corn and rice. And it's very high in protein. It's not a complete protein like quinoa. You do need to complete that protein if you're counting on that as your protein source. It's a great flour, and it goes nicely in things. I like millet flour. I use it a lot in my combos. And I will invite you to come to my website, which is plateology.com. It's on all of your sheets. And you are welcome to do any kind of free trial. We have a month free trial. You can copy every recipe on my entire site. I have, I think, right at 1,000 gluten-free recipes, and everything from main dishes to snacks to desserts, every category. And also a lot of very, very simple recipes for those that may be rotating or have multiple food sensitivities. There was a time in my life where I was only not allergic to 4 things. So though I've not experienced Lyme, I'll leave that to you all. Thank you very much. I have experienced many other health conditions, including cancer, and I've been down some really rocky paths myself. So I do understand, not the same way a Lyme patient. I hate to tell you, but I'm very glad that I can't be empathetic with you, but I can be sympathetic, and I have worked with Lyme patients for a while. So I do understand what you do. What do you think of the pie?
Okay.
Normal?
Awesome.
Tastes good? Tastes like
great.
something anybody would eat? There you go. What about the crust? Yeah, it is good. You can get it drier if you leave that egg out. You know what I mean? You can do it both ways. Any other questions? Yeah, peanuts feed yeast. Peanuts have a mold on it called aflatoxin. It's also extremely hard on your own system. Now, if they're organic peanuts, sometimes they say aflatoxin free, but because peanut is actually a legume and not a nut, it's one that has to be eliminated, even if it's not aflatoxin mold. There are other molds on peanuts with yeast. So do pistachios. I know a lot of people love pistachios.
What about corn?
Well, if you're not allergic to corn and you can utilize corn, make certain it's organic because 90% of the corn we get is GMO. And remember that anytime you choose an organic product, you're taking another load off. We take the load of chemicals off of our body. That helps. If you have to use a spray for ticks, we just went to an area where ticks were super prevalent. I wanted my boys, we don't touch things like off or anything like that. But I'm thinking, okay, my guys are really chemical free. They're very rarely exposed to chemicals. We're using whatever is going to keep ticks off of us. Have you ever felt that way? Sometimes you make a concession. So the awesome thing is if you're not using all these chemicals in your food, you're not using chemicals in your cleaning products in your home, then if you have to use a chemical, antibiotics, drugs that have to be used in Lyme, the load is less. But if you have all these other loads on you, and you add that load, that's why so many people, they can't handle that load. It's too much.
For being careful with yeast, what about conventional yeast? The different probiotics, can that feed?
Yes, it can, because anything fermented can feed yeast. And in kombucha is a form of a probiotic called Saccharomyces. And Saccharomyces can also feed yeast depending on what type of yeast you have. So even though there's this huge move with paleo and making a lot of fermented foods, if you have a good gut to start with and not a huge problem, you'll probably do fine. And I have had people tell me it has really helped my digestion, it's really helped my gut. If yeast is a big problem, I've had people say, oh my gosh, I drank kombucha and I think I'm getting worse and worse and worse. Yeast is breaking out in my mouth, it's breaking out under my armpits, it's breaking out, all over my body. And that's because for many people it can be worse. Remember that no fermented foods on a yeast program, and that includes vinegar. And we all know that vinegar can be wonderful. There's whole books written on apple cider vinegar, just not if you have yeast. So there are things we want to be careful, and not everybody's the same. So we don't want to lump everybody into one category, and I don't want to go against probably most of the doctors that you're working with in this room I've worked with, and sometimes I say, I trump. I know, I've been here doing this longer than you, and try getting off off this and see if it helps.
What about using honey for soup?
No, it's just as high. The great thing about honey is it has nutritive value, and God made it as a good, natural thing. But if you have yeast, if you have any issues that feed sugar, like bacteria or virus or fungus, then unfortunately the body does not give a rip. It likes honey even better than sugar because it's easier for it to snatch out that simple fructose and grow. Even if it's raw and organic, and it doesn't matter. Sugar is sugar is sugar, unfortunately. Same way with maple syrup. Same way, that's why when I said low glycemic, coconut and rice are the lowest glycemic sweeteners that there are. But they're still sweeteners. And this isn't still, you don't get to make strawberry pie and have it every day. You don't get to make even, did you like the brown Rice Krispie ball? Mm-hmm. You don't get to make things like that every single solitary day. They're treats. They're things to get you through. They're fun foods, okay? The muffins you could probably get by with because they're pretty minimal as far as if you were having that with the protein.
Did you, with the vinegar and yeast, I was always under the impression that vinegar and yeast, the vinegar was good for yeast.
No, it is not good for yeast. It does not help kill it. Okay, it is actually internally. Yeah. Now, you can use it vaginally if you have a vaginal yeast infection because it acidifies the environment and the yeast can't survive in that environment. Mm-hmm. But to eat it, it feeds yeast.
Okay.
What about mushrooms? Same. Mushrooms are fungus. Fungus among us feeds the fungus among us. Seriously, yeah. Now, shiitake mushrooms and some of those mushrooms, we're using those in an immune building way. And so sometimes, and this is sometimes because I had a really severe cancer patient with very severe yeast. And yeast is often what kills cancer patients. It's not the cancer that kills them, it's the co-infections. Ever heard that term? Along with the cancer. And they were doing some mushroom components to try to build their immune system, and actually it made the yeast so much worse, even with shiitake and maitake and some of the medicinal mushrooms. So that has to be a call. by your doc or by your own individual situation,
This
because
is
there
one
are
of the
docs
vegetables
using
I
it.
try to do, so apparently that's not why I should put on I keep on my list.
The other one thing about mushrooms is be sure if you're doing mushrooms, try really hard to get organic, because the medium that they grow mushrooms in is really funky. It has a lot of chemicals.
What about Russian mushrooms?
Like rishitake. Yeah, all the maitake, the rishis, all of those shiitakes, they're medicinal. But if you have a bad yeast problem, again, that has to be almost an individual by individual, because there's great studies on reishi for improving your immune system. But if you have yeast, again, sometimes what's good for one may not be good for the other. But I don't want to just make a blanket statement about that. As far as growing yeast in your body, mushrooms are kind of mushrooms. They're fungus. Yeah, I mean, I love mushrooms, you guys. When I say these kinds of things, it's just to give you, and again, everybody is a case by case. It's a person by person basis. Nothing is just across the board, except they really do want you to avoid sugar. They really do want you to avoid gluten and dairy. Because those are three huge loads on the body. So I have to fly to the next event that I have to do, and I'm going to clean up quickly while you finish. And so if you have questions at the end, you're welcome to come up and ask me, but please don't be offended if I'm cleaning up and putting things in my bag so that I can scoot out and get over to Avon. Okay?
Thank you, Jodi. I hope this was helpful. Was it helpful for everybody? I'll give a personal testimony. With a family of 7 and 5 children of older ages who really like to eat. And I looked at gluten-free and the dairy-free and the organic, and I looked, my grocery bill budget just doubled. So we were dividing our family, and those that needed the organic meat got that, and they needed the sugar-free, and I was double cooking, and it was just absolutely awful. It was exhausting. It was, I got to where I didn't even want to cook anymore. And so we just gradually made the switch that everybody in our house made the same thing. So if you have a family household, the other thing is I could light a candle, and my husband would say, I'd really like to have some cookies, normal cookies. Everybody in the family that was gluten-free, sugar-free could smell it no matter what you did, and it just made it brought stress. I tried to do it at 1 in the morning. It didn't matter. They'd wake up and smell it. So, we finally switched, and it's amazing with finding organic meat. We found a supplier where 5 families were getting butchering. And Jodi wouldn't tell you this, but her family have an organic farm with beef, and so you could get.
Where do we sign up?
Yeah. And so we bought a freezer, and then we split meat. We bought a cow, had a butcher, and that is one way we're doing that. And so that may be something that would help. And the last thing, let's see, I know that there was something else.
We'll do a how to save money one too, because that's such a whole thing. How to cut costs, working together. It is doable.
So if you would like Jodi to come back, if you raise your hand, so I have it taken out. Okay, you're coming back. Okay, thank you. The other thing is I am compiling a list of doctors that are Lyme friendly. Cardiologists, pulmonologists, surgeons, and all. If you have encountered a specialist, a pediatrician, a family doctor, and you said they are willing to work with your specialist and they treat you with respect and they're willing to be humble and learn, I would really appreciate that you would share that information with Indiana Lyme Connect because I'm working with the doctors and they're saying, okay, I need to see a patient to see a neurologist. And then I just look at the list and say, this is where people have found something positive. Because I have a list of a lot of negative, as I'm sure you do too. But I'm excited to say there are 6 specialists that we have found in the greater Indianapolis area that are all willing to learn and work with our specialists. So that is something that I want to ask you. I would really appreciate you taking time to do that. Yes?
I didn't know if anybody, I have a ton of I've shared, everything, and so I bought
That's a great thing.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it, and stay tuned to Indiana Lyme Connect. Thank you.